This video was brought to you by NordVPN. It's been a while since we did our last Ukraine video, and that's largely because not much has changed on the front line since our last video. However, in the past week or so, Russia has committed a significant amount of personnel and material to Avdiivka, a suburb to the north of Donetsk city that's been one of the most fiercely contested parts of the front line since 2014. While Russian troops have made little progress and actually lost a significant amount of armor, this is the most committed Russian offensive since perhaps Bakhmut, and it comes after a steady month-long rise in Russian ground attacks. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what's changed on the battlefield in the last couple of months, the Russian assault on Avdiivka, and whether this could spell the beginning of a new Russian offensive. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, before we get into what's been happening in Avdiivka, let's take a look at what's happened elsewhere on the battlefield. In the south, around Kherson, while the front lines haven't moved all that much, in the last couple of weeks or so, the Ukrainians have been building up their presence on the left side of the Dnipro, after establishing a bridgehead there a few months ago. Ukraine's main position here is in the marshes across from Kherson city, outside of the Russian-occupied town of Oleshki. But just last week, they staged a raid further up the river. And Russian bloggers have been talking about a significant buildup of Ukrainian troops on the right bank of the river in Kherson city. So it's possible that we will see another push here soon. But a cross-river assault won't be easy, and Ukraine has been unable to make much progress towards Oleshki so far. In Zaporizhia, where Ukraine has been trying to reach the strategically important town of Tokmak, again, not all that much has changed. Although we should say that since our last Ukraine video, the Ukrainian army have made some progress around the towns of Robotyne and Verbov, but the consensus among well-informed analysts seems to be that further gains in the area are unlikely, largely thanks to Russia's mining operation and the well-fortified defense lines. In the east, the Ukrainians have established total control over Bakhmut's southern suburb of Klitschkova last month, but have been unable to make progress towards Bakhmut itself. And the Ukrainians' efforts around Bakhmut have become a point of controversy, with some analysts arguing that while Bakhmut obviously has a symbolic significance, it doesn't have all that much of a strategic significance, and that Ukraine would have been better off focusing its resources around Tokmak. In fact, this was a point made by a former presidential advisor just last week, when he described the counteroffensive as a disaster. And the New York Times reports that this has long been a point of disagreement between the Ukrainian and US officials. However, the one place that we have seen significant action recently is Avdiivka, a small suburb with a pre-war population of about 30,000 people that lies just north of Donetsk city. Now, Avdiivka was one of the most fiercely contested territories way back in 2014, which means that the Ukrainians have been defending it for nearly a decade. And unsurprisingly, Ukraine has some pretty well-developed defensive fortifications here, which is why, for the first few months of the war, the Russians essentially left it alone. In late 2022, however, Avdiivka was assaulted by Patriot PMC, a private military company founded by Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Patriot PMC's efforts occurred at the same time that the Wagner Group had been deployed around Bakhmut, and as such, a tacit competition quickly developed between Wagner and Patriot over who could take Bakhmut and Avdiivka first, fueled by a personal feud between Prigozhin and Shoigu. And unfortunately for Shoigu, Patriot PMC essentially gave up in early 2023 because Avdiivka was just too well fortified, and instead they tried to encircle it, cutting off the railway line which runs into the suburb from the northwest. This didn't really work either, but in the last couple of weeks we've seen a renewed Russian effort, with really quite a significant amount of troops and armor. Again, they've tried to encircle the town, with a pincer movement going from Krasnohorivka in the north and Vodain in the south. While the Russians were able to make some progress on both fronts, this was still a bit of a disaster for them. And this was especially true in the north, where Russian forces were able to reach the railway line going into Avdiivka, but suffered the heaviest losses they've seen anywhere on the battlefield since at least Bakhmut. Ukrainian anti-tank teams were able to take out a whole load of Russian armor, and Russian bloggers report that Russia has had to resort to Bakhmut-style meat attacks in order to make progress. UK intelligence even described the assault as Russia's most significant offensive operation since at least January, involving somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 troops. So what's really going on here? Why is Russia suddenly plowing so much personnel and material into Avdiivka? Well, Avdiivka itself doesn't really have all that much of a strategic value, but by focusing on it, Russia will be hoping to force Ukraine into redeploying some of its forces there and pulling them away from Kherson, where, as we've mentioned, Russian bloggers have been anxiously talking up another Ukrainian offensive. Russia will also be hoping that after months of offensive operations, Ukraine's forces will be relatively exhausted, which gives them the chance to encircle the few thousand Ukrainian troops stationed in Avdiivka, and that even its relatively meager advances might force Ukraine into a costly counterattack. There's also been some suggestion that this could be the beginning of a wider Russian offensive, given that Russia's offensives have been escalating for the past few weeks. For what it's worth, we actually think this is kind of unlikely, given that the ground will probably be too muddy for combined arms operations by mid-November, and it's more likely that Russia's just testing Ukraine's defensive capabilities after the counteroffensive, which most analysts think has now essentially finished. Ultimately, what Avdiivka demonstrates is that Russia doesn't really have the offensive potential to make significant gains. And with the mud season fast approaching, we should expect the front lines to stabilize even further in the next few months. While peace still feels unlikely, the coming stasis might at least create the possibility for negotiations. And it's noteworthy that Putin himself said a few days ago that peace talks are now more likely after the counteroffensive. With news like this constantly filling the headlines, it's easy to feel like the world is getting less safe. Fortunately though, when it comes to your digital safety, NordVPN has your back. It's an unfortunate reality that online scams and phishing attacks are on the rise at the moment. With us constantly bombarded by emails from our banks, social media accounts, and annoying newsletters we forgot we even signed up to, it's easy to click the wrong thing. And one weak link can compromise security and bring things crashing down. With the protection of NordVPN though, you can use their threat protection features to identify potentially suspicious links. And even if you did reach a suspicious website, NordVPN's data encryption tools will protect against a number of other attacks, including malicious man-in-the-middle breaches. Even if things do go wrong though, NordVPN's dark web monitoring service is always scanning your details and passwords, and can actively notify you before you even notice something has gone wrong. Plus, if you sign up now for a 2-year plan using our link, you'll not only get a massive discount, but you'll also get 4 extra months totally free. Now, we've been told that sometimes when people hear us talk about NordVPN, they just open up a new tab and start searching, but don't actually use our link. Now, I'm certainly glad that they get to use the service regardless, but you only get the discount and you only support the channel if you use our link. So if you're trying to improve our journalism by signing up to Nord, then use our link when you do. That way, you'll get their great service at a discount and support TLDR.